With a federal government that is currently overspending at the rate of nearly $4 million a minute and passing thousand-plus page bills they don't even read, which control virtually every aspect of our lives, we can appreciate like never before these words of President Ronald Reagan. As government expands, liberty contracts. My name is Ken Ivory, and I'm running for the Utah House of Representatives in District 47. I'm grateful that you would take a few minutes of your time to consider the opportunity and the constitutional duty that each of us has in our state to secure and maintain our liberty. A prominent Utah leader, David O. McKay, defined liberty this way: next to the bestowal of life itself, the right to direct that life is God's greatest gift to man. He also stated that the preservation of individual liberty is the most immediate and urgent obligation and duty of all liberty-loving people. Personal liberty in England in the 1500s was virtually non-existent. In 1535, Thomas More, a former Chancellor of England, was beheaded because he wouldn't acquiesce to the moral edicts of the king. A year later, William Tyndale was strangled, and then his body was dug up and burned for translating the Bible into English in order to make it available to the masses. We know that because of religious persecutions and the restrictions of liberty, many in Europe fled across the ocean, opting for liberty and sacrifice in a new frontier over the tyranny of kings and monarchs. With a greater degree of liberty came prosperity, and King George saw the riches of this land as an opportunity to finance his worldwide expansion of power and dominion, and began instituting familiar government policy. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. The king's increasing assault on the liberty of the people created a pressure cooker that gave rise to the colonists declaring their independence from Great Britain and the ensuing Revolutionary War. In their Declaration of Independence from England, the people 3 times declared themselves to be 13 free and independent states. The states recognized the need to combine their power for certain matters, such as international trade and relations, but jealously guarded against any suggestion that in doing so they relinquished in any way their individual state sovereignty to a central governing power. Thus, the states initially ratified a very loose compact between them, known as the Articles of Confederation. In 1775, these same free and independent colonies sent delegates to a convention to consider amendments to the Articles of Confederation. Instead, they proposed and presented a new form of government under a new constitution, the formation of which both Madison and Washington described as little short of a standing miracle. The language of the founding documents and the words of the founders themselves leave no doubt that the states were to be the most critical check and balance for what the founders understood was the natural tendency of a central government to incrementally seize powers that were never delegated to it. James Madison, known as the father of the Constitution, described the balance of powers of this new constitutional government this way: the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. The former will be exercised principally on external objects as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. The powers reserved to the states will extend to all the objects which in the ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. Madison further described this new constitutional form of government as a compound republic, explaining that in a single republic, all the power surrendered by the people is submitted to the administration of a single government, and the usurpations, powers exercised by the government that were never delegated to it, are guarded against by a division of the government into distinct and separate departments, separation of powers. In the compound republic of America, however, the power surrendered by the people is first divided between 2 distinct governments, and then the portion allotted to each subdivided among distinct and separate departments, separation of powers at the state level, separation of powers at the federal level. Hence, a double security arises to the rights of the people. The different governments will control each other at the same time that each will be controlled by itself. In fact, the states only ratified the Constitution in 1787 upon their mutual promise that the first Congress would prepare a strict Bill of Rights to expressly protect the rights and the liberties of the people from this new central government, and to unquestionably limit the powers of the federal government by means of the 10th Amendment, which plainly states, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people." Thomas Jefferson knew a thing or two about this new constitutional government and had this to say about the critical balance of power between the states and the national government, known as federalism. He said, "I consider the foundation of the Constitution as laid on this ground, that all powers not delegated by the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states or to the people," in other words, the 10th Amendment. To take a single step beyond the boundaries thus specifically drawn around the powers of Congress is to take possession of a boundless field of power, no longer susceptible of any definition. Alexander Hamilton is the founder most recognized as advocating for a strong central government, and even he had this to say: "It may safely be received as an axiom in our political system that the state governments will in all possible contingencies afford complete security against the invasions of the public liberty by the national authority." And this amazing statement: "We, the people, may safely rely on the disposition of the state legislatures to erect barriers against the encroachments of the national authority." The Constitution itself recognizes that the state legislatures are indispensable parties in maintaining the balance of powers set forth in the Constitution. In Article 6, Clause 3, it provides that the members of the several state legislatures shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution. We could refer to the words of many other founders, the ratifying conventions of the several states, or the preamble to the original Bill of Rights, regarding the right and the duty of the states to act as the most critical check and balance to the national government exceeding the few and defined powers that were delegated to it by the states. However, we can sum up the duty of the states in these words by John Dickinson, which were wholly endorsed by George Washington: that the government of each state is and is to be sovereign and supreme in all matters that relate to each state only, and is to be subordinate barely in those matters that relate to the whole, and it will be their own faults if the several states suffer the federal sovereignty to interfere in the things of their respective jurisdictions. Even though Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution only grants 17 distinct powers to the federal government, and the 10th Amendment reserves all other powers to the states, today we have a federal government that is intruding on our liberty in virtually every aspect of our daily lives. From mandating national health care on penalty of a $250,000 fine and 5 years in prison, to controlling nearly 70% of Utah's lands, from dictating one-size-fits-all policies from Washington for the education of our unique children in Utah, to controlling the flow rate of our toilets, all while saddling us, our children, and their children with a national debt approaching $14 trillion, unfunded obligations for Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security in excess of $100 trillion, and still overspending by more than $1.5 trillion per year. What comes next is entirely up to us. Either we allow this pressure cooker on our liberties to continue to the boiling point like it did in 1776, or we simply restore the critical balance of powers between the states and the national government already established in our Constitution. We are experiencing today firsthand the truth of those words of Ronald Reagan, that as government expands, liberty, the right to direct our life, contracts. However, the flip side of this statement is also true and largely explains why we are where we are today. As our determination to secure the blessings of liberty to our posterity contracts, government will only continue to expand. Plato summed up both the problem and the solution in these 21 words: "The penalty that good men pay for not being interested in politics is to be governed by men worse than themselves." President Reagan gave us our personal marching orders for these challenging times in these inspiring words: "This is a wonderful time to be alive. We're lucky not to live in pale and timid times. We've been blessed with the opportunity to stand for something, for liberty and freedom and fairness, and these are things worth fighting for, worth devoting our lives to, and we have good reason to be hopeful and optimistic. So let us go forth with good cheer and stout hearts, happy warriors, out to seize back a country and a world to freedom." I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I also want you to know just how much you and your efforts matter. Will you please join us in taking a stand to erect barriers against the national authority, in the words of Alexander Hamilton, and to restore the critical balance of power between the states and the federal government that is the very foundation of our Constitution, in the words of Thomas Jefferson? Will you please contact me, and will you also please pass along this video to your friends and family members who are also concerned about the future of our state and securing the blessings of liberty to our posterity? Thank you so very much. We truly are blessed at this time with the opportunity to stand for something.